The shove wasn't hard enough to knock me over, but it was enough to freeze every voice in the cabin. Her palm pressed into my shoulder, fingers curling as if to push me further back into my seat. "You're being difficult," she barked, loud enough for half the passengers to hear. The aisle went still. The sound of wheels dragging across the overhead bin track stopped mid-motion. A man across the row lowered his phone mid-scroll, eyes locked on us. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her, holding my ground. In that brief silence, the air between us felt charged, not with fear, but with something heavier. Somewhere behind me, a seatbelt clicked open. A woman whispered to the man beside her, "Is she serious right now?" The attendant's jaw tightened, and her voice rose again. The captain's call button chimed from the galley. I knew exactly what was happening, and what was about to happen next. The clock in my mind had already started counting down, not to departure, but to something else entirely. In less than 30 minutes, the plane we were all supposed to be on would still be sitting at the gate. And it wouldn't be because of weather or maintenance or any reason printed on a boarding pass. But the reason why? That was about to make every person on this aircraft remember my face. If stories like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. And in the comments, tell me, what country are you watching from? I keep my robe on a wooden hanger and my temper on ice. Years in a federal courtroom taught me that a raised voice can close more doors than it opens. I've learned to speak so that every word counts, and to listen so no detail is lost. My work has never been about the title. It's about the trust. The trust that when I walk into a courtroom, the scales aren't tipped by skin color, wealth, or reputation. It's about making sure a young attorney from a tiny rural town has the same chance to argue their case as a partner from a top-tier firm. That's why I was on this flight. A first-generation law graduate, the daughter of a postal clerk and a school bus driver, had asked me to administer her swearing-in ceremony. She told me her grandmother would be there in a wheelchair, wearing a hat she'd saved for the proudest day of her life. It wasn't just another trip, it was a promise kept. Before I left home, my mother called. She always asks about the day's cases, but this time she said something different. Move with quiet dignity, baby. The world doesn't always clap for you when you've earned it, but you don't give it a reason to boo. I've carried those words for decades, especially through moments when respect wasn't given as freely to me as to others wearing the same robe. I'm no stranger to rooms where people look past me, or to conversations where my credentials are treated like a surprise rather than a certainty. Still, I've never let those moments dictate how I walk through the world. Calm is my armor. Precision is my shield. But calm isn't the same as silent. And on that day, headed for a ceremony meant to honor another woman's journey, I had no idea how quickly my own dignity would be put on trial. 30,000 feet below where it should have been tested. The boarding gate was only a few minutes away, but already the weight of what was about to happen had begun to press in. I just didn't know yet whose hands would try to push me down. At the gate, the smiles skipped me. The agent's grin stretched wide for the man in front of me, nodding as he scanned his phone. But when it was my turn, his expression cooled to something functional. No greeting, no small talk. I handed over my boarding pass and ID. He looked at the pass, then back at me, then back at the pass again, as though the seat number might change if he stared long enough. "Can I see another form of identification?" His tone was flat, the question framed as if this were standard. It wasn't. I'd flown this airline more times than I could count, and never once had anyone asked me for more than my license. I slid my judicial ID across the counter. His eyes flicked over the title, then dropped quickly, almost as if holding eye contact might confirm what he'd just read. Without a word, he scanned my ticket again, pressing it down on the reader harder than necessary. "Group 1, he said at last, handing it back. My seat, 2A, was already marked on the boarding display. First class. Aisle. Paid in full. As I stepped aside to wait, I caught the faint exchange between the gate agent and another staff member. The glance wasn't long, but it carried something I'd seen too often. An unspoken question about whether I belonged where my ticket said I did. Boarding announcements started, and the same agent's tones softened for others in my group. When my row was called, The smile didn't return. Only the same functional nod, the same silent inspection, as if stepping onto the jet bridge was something I still had to earn. I stepped onto the jet bridge and into the cabin, offering a polite nod to the flight attendant standing at the door. She glanced at my ticket, then at me, and motioned toward the aisle without a word. When I reached 2A, the passenger in the window seat was already settled, earbuds in. I placed my carry-on in the overhead. The attendant appeared beside me, watching closely as if expecting me to drop it. "Careful with that," she said, her tone clipped. It wasn't concern, it was correction. I took my seat, folded my coat over my lap, and asked if I could have a glass of water before takeoff. She paused, exhaling audibly. "Water will be served after boarding is complete, ma'am. Please wait until it's appropriate." It was the kind of answer that didn't match the question. A request made politely was returned with a rule that felt like a rebuke. The drink service started for the row ahead of us. She leaned in to set a glass down for my seatmate. Gentle, steady, quiet. When she placed my tray later, it landed with a dull thud, rattling the cutlery. Minutes later, she returned with a reminder. "Seatbelt secured? We'll be checking again." I nodded, though it was already fastened. Her eyes lingered for a moment before moving on. The man beside me pulled one earbud out. "Hang in there," he murmured, his voice low enough that she couldn't hear. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. But I noted it, tucking it away with the rest. Over the years, I've learned to collect these moments like evidence. Not because each one alone is a crime, but because together they form a pattern, a quiet map of where the line begins to bend. The announcements continued, passengers settled, and the hum of engines rose. I sat still, keeping my composure as the small cuts kept coming, knowing that sometimes it's the smallest things that lead to the loudest moments. If stories like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. And in the comments, tell me, what country are you watching from? Policy became a weapon. The attendant returned, holding a small electronic tablet in one hand. She stopped in front of my row, her expression sharpened into something between suspicion and resolve. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" she asked. I handed it over without comment. She looked at the seat number, then at me, then back to the screen in her hand. "This seat is for a first-class upgrade," she said, her voice carrying just enough for the 2 rows ahead to hear. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The man beside me shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. I could feel eyes from across the aisle following every word. "I am," I replied evenly. "It's printed on my ticket." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, don't be aggressive." The irony was almost absurd. My voice hadn't risen, my posture hadn't changed, but her choice of words wasn't about my tone. It was about framing me in front of an audience. Across the aisle, a woman reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen, angling it just enough to catch the interaction without announcing it. She didn't say a word, but her intent was clear. She was preserving the moment. The attendant checked the screen again, scrolling as though looking for a reason to confirm her suspicion. "Sir," she called toward the galley, "I need a supervisor to verify a seat assignment here." Conversations nearby faded into a hush. My seatmate kept his eyes forward, jaw tight. The woman with the phone tilted it slightly, her gaze fixed on the attendant's hands. I sat back, my boarding pass still in her grip, and said nothing more. In a courtroom, silence can be louder than argument. Here, it felt like the only way to let her actions speak for themselves. Somewhere in the back of the plane, the shuffle of steps drew closer. The supervisor was coming, and with them, the moment this flight would stop being just another trip. Her hand found my shoulder. My patience found its line. It wasn't a shove that could be mistaken for an accident. The palm landed firmly, fingers curling in as if to push me deeper into my seat. My body stayed still, but my mind marked the contact as clearly as a gavel strike. "You need to step out of the seat until this is sorted," she said, her voice pitched higher than before. "I'm in the correct seat," I replied, tone steady, hands resting on the armrest. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue with you." Her voice carried now, pulling the attention of nearly every passenger in first class, and more than a few from the rows behind. The aisle fell silent. One man paused mid-lift with his carry-on, holding it above his head as though afraid any movement might snap the tension further. I looked past her, toward the galley, and saw another crew member glance over before disappearing behind the curtain. "I need the captain up here," the attendant said into the interphone, her voice still loud enough for passengers to hear. I didn't move. My seatbelt remained fastened, my gaze fixed forward. Years on the bench had taught me that restraint often unsettles an aggressor more than any argument could. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. Another voice whispered, "This is ridiculous." Though I couldn't tell who said it. The woman across the aisle still had her phone angled in our direction, recording quietly. Within a minute, the captain emerged from the cockpit, eyes moving from the attendant to me, then to the boarding pass still in her hand. He didn't speak right away. He simply listened as she launched into an explanation, pointing toward me mid-sentence. Every word she used framed me as a problem. Non-compliant, refused instructions, creating a disturbance. I kept my voice low when I finally spoke. "Captain, I am seated where my ticket assigns me. I have not raised my voice or refused any lawful request." For a moment, it was just the three of us in that narrow strip of aisle, the rest of the plane holding its breath. The captain's jaw tightened. Something in his expression told me this flight was about to change course, without leaving the ground. I made one call, not for favors, for procedure. The captain had barely finished speaking when the attendant handed back my boarding pass with a pointed sigh. "You'll need to step off the plane," she said. I unbuckled, stood, and walked the short distance to the front. There was no anger in my steps, only a deliberate calm. At the threshold, I asked the gate agent for access to the service phone. His hesitation lasted just long enough to tell me he wasn't used to passengers making this request. I called airport police first. My words were measured. Passenger removed from aircraft following physical contact from crew. Request incident number and immediate response. I gave the gate, flight number, and my seat. The officer on the other end repeated the details back to me, confirmation that the record had begun. Next, I asked the agent to connect me to airline operations. "Please bring the station manager and a supervisor to this gate," I said. "I will also need the names of the crew on duty." My voice was steady, but my choice of words was intentional. This wasn't a request they could dismiss as inconvenience, it was documentation. I mentioned the relevant statutory provisions, the passenger's right to safe travel without physical harm, the carrier's duty to investigate any claim of assault, and the necessity of securing witness statements while still on site. Not a speech, not a performance. Just the facts they were now responsible for acting on. The gate area had grown quiet. Passengers who had followed out stood nearby, watching. A few came forward quietly to say they'd seen everything and were willing to provide accounts. I thanked them, making sure their names were noted. Every step was by the book, and that was the point. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about making sure the process couldn't be buried under an unfortunate misunderstanding later. Within minutes, I saw the station manager approaching at a brisk pace. The way she scanned the gate told me she already knew. This wasn't a customer service delay. This was an incident. If you're getting the message, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. And in the comments, tell me, what country are you watching from? Truth arrived in camera rolls. The station manager reached me first, a notepad in one hand, radio clipped to her blazer. She introduced herself quickly and asked for my version of events. I kept it short, factual, and free of opinion. Who touched me, what was said, and the order it happened in. Then I pointed to the passengers who had stepped forward. One by one, they confirmed what they'd seen. The woman across the aisle handed me her phone. On the screen, the video captured the moment the attendant questioned my seat, the accusation of being aggressive, and the push. The sound was clear enough to hear the shift in her voice when she addressed me versus the other passengers. I asked the manager to note the passenger's name, contact information, and seat number, then return the device immediately. Chain of custody matters. Evidence loses weight if it looks mishandled. A man from 3 rows back offered a still image showing the attendant's hand on my shoulder. He'd taken it without thinking, he said, just instinct, because it didn't feel right. Again, his name, seat, and the time were recorded. Another passenger spoke quietly to the manager. "I work in aviation compliance," she said. If needed, I can confirm policy was misapplied here." Her calm, matter-of-fact delivery carried weight that I knew would matter later. By now, the gate area had drawn a crowd. Some passengers from the flight lingered, while others from nearby gates had begun asking what was going on. I didn't respond, but I saw a younger traveler typing quickly on her phone. Within minutes, murmurs began. Someone had posted about a first-class passenger being removed for no reason. I didn't see the post, but I saw the reactions ripple through the onlookers. Raised brows, short gasps, quiet disbelief. The station manager's radio crackled. Ops was asking for a status update. She stepped aside to respond, but I caught one phrase: evidence from multiple passengers. The weight of their words, the images, the sequence. It was no longer just my account against hers. There was a record now, layered and corroborated, moving beyond the reach of dismissal. The manager returned, her expression tight. "We're holding the flight at the gate until this is resolved," she said. Her tone carried no uncertainty. For the first time since boarding, the power in the situation shifted, and it was about to shift even further. They chose a template over humanity. Before the station manager could finalize her notes, an airline spokesperson arrived. Pressed uniform, polished smile, the kind of presence meant to reassure without conceding anything. He handed me a printed statement. It read like every other public relations release I'd ever seen. "We take the safety and comfort of our passengers seriously. We are reviewing the matter. We regret any inconvenience caused." Not one acknowledgement of what actually happened. No mention of the physical contact. No recognition of the accusations made loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. And certainly no reflection of the racial bias that had been on display from the gate to the aisle. I read it once, folded it in half, and handed it back. "This is not an answer," I said simply. He suggested I could share my experience with the airline's social media team or customer care department. I declined. This wasn't going to be reduced to a comment thread and a case number. Instead, I asked the station manager to formally log my request for the preservation of all relevant evidence: the CCTV at the gate, the crew manifests, and any internal communications between the flight attendants and operations during boarding. I wanted the exact times documented, including when the captain was called forward. While the spokesperson spoke in circles, I stayed silent, writing everything down, every name, badge number, and the sequence of their arrival. Silence unnerves people who expect defensiveness. It leaves them filling the air with words they can't take back. He moved toward the topic of reboarding. "If you'd like, we can get you back into your seat now so we can depart." "I will not reboard under the same crew," I said, each word deliberate. "I will not sit in an enclosed cabin for hours with individuals who have already misrepresented my actions and put their hands on me without cause." The statement landed heavy. The spokesperson blinked, then glanced toward the station manager, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. They both knew the optics of forcing me back on board now would be catastrophic, not just for this flight, but for the airline's public image. Somewhere beyond the gate doors, the passengers still seated were growing restless. The engines remained silent. The clock on the departures board kept moving. But this plane wasn't going anywhere yet, and I had no intention of letting it take off under the same conditions that brought me here. Safety over schedule. The operations manager arrived with 2 supervisors in tow, their expressions a mix of urgency and calculation. They spoke briefly with the station manager, then motioned the captain over from where he'd been standing near the jet bridge door. From the corner of my eye, I saw him glance toward the cabin. He knew every minute at the gate was costing the airline, not just in fuel and scheduling, but in passenger frustration. But there was more at stake here than departure time. The supervisors asked for a full recounting from each crew member involved. The attendant who had put her hand on me kept her arms crossed, voice rising each time she insisted she had followed procedure. Her version painted me as argumentative and non-compliant, despite the witnesses standing a few feet away. Then the union representative arrived, called in to observe any potential crew discipline. His presence made it clear. This had escalated beyond a passenger complaint. Now it was an operational dispute with contractual implications. Operations made their position known. We cannot depart until this matter is resolved. That includes reviewing whether the crew can continue this flight." The captain's face hardened. His authority was clear, but so was the liability. Flying with a passenger who had filed a formal incident, supported by multiple witness statements and video evidence, wasn't a risk the airline could take. I didn't argue for cancellation, and I didn't need to. My role was to answer questions factually, maintain the integrity of the record, and ensure the safety and dignity of everyone involved, including the other passengers. It took less than 15 minutes for the decision to be made. The flight would remain at the gate while the crew was relieved of duty and replacements were brought in. Passengers would be reaccommodated as needed. There was no announcement about why. Airlines rarely put the truth in the PA system when it's inconvenient. But the looks exchanged between passengers stepping off told the real story. They'd seen enough to know this wasn't about weather or mechanical issues. For me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about process, accountability, and ensuring that no one else on that flight, today or tomorrow, would be subjected to the same treatment. The departure board changed from on time to delayed, then to canceled. And with that, the night's course was set. If this happens to a judge, what about a teenager? That thought stayed with me as I watched the departure board flicker from delayed to canceled. My title, years of service and spotless travel record, hadn't shielded me from being singled out, publicly challenged, and physically handled as though I didn't belong in the seat I paid for. Now imagine a young traveler. No credentials to wave in anyone's face, no experience to know which words to use when authority tries to shrink them. Imagine the imbalance when the only voice in the aisle belongs to the uniform, and every word is framed as a matter of policy. Air travel has its own hierarchy. The uniform carries weight, the captain's word can't be overruled on the spot, and passengers are expected to comply without hesitation. Compliance is necessary for safety. Respect is necessary for humanity. When one is used as a substitute for the other, it stops being about safety and starts being about control. I've seen bias in many rooms, but altitude changes the stakes. In the air or on the jet bridge, there are no easy exits. No neutral witnesses wandering in from the street. The person in the uniform shapes the narrative, and that narrative can decide whether you sit quietly in your seat or find yourself standing at the gate, explaining why you're no longer welcome on board. Some will say, airports are stressful places, tempers flare. Stress doesn't justify humiliation. It doesn't excuse questioning a passenger's right to their seat twice when the boarding pass is clear. It doesn't explain why the tone used with one traveler drips with irritation while others get warmth and courtesy. And yes, this was about race. Not in an abstract academic way, but in the very real way a stranger's perception can shift the moment they see your face. Bias doesn't always announce itself with slurs or shouts. Sometimes it's in the second ID check, the sigh when you ask for water, the "don't be aggressive" said to someone whose voice hasn't changed in pitch or volume. That's why the record matters. That's why witnesses matter, because without them, it's just your word against the uniform. And in too many cases, the uniform wins. Dignity is not negotiable. The following morning, I filed a formal written complaint with the airline's corporate office, addressed directly to the head of operations and copied to their legal department. I attached a summary of events, witness names, and the list of evidence requested the night before. It wasn't anger on paper. It was a record, precise and indisputable. Along with the complaint, I included a specific request, a comprehensive review of the crew's de-escalation training. Not a refresher on serving drinks or seating passengers, but a deep look into how bias, conscious or unconscious, affects their judgment and interactions. 2 days later, a representative from the airline called. The voice on the other end was polished, careful. She began with an apology. "We are sorry for the experience you had on our flight." I stopped her there. "You're apologizing to the wrong person if you stop with me. Everyone on that plane witnessed what happened. Some heard the words, some saw the push. Your responsibility is to all of them, not just me." Silence, then a promise to take it under advisement. I added my own conditions. A public acknowledgement of the incident, a commitment to annual training refreshers, and transparency about the resolution process. not only internally, but shared with those directly affected. They hesitated, but I made my position clear. An apology without accountability is just a sentence. I expect a change in practice. In the meantime, the mentoring ceremony I'd traveled for had been relocated. Another judge stepped in to host it at a local courthouse instead of the original venue. I still attended. When I walked in, the young attorney's grandmother was there in her wheelchair, her hat tilted just right, tears in her eyes. The attorney herself stood tall, nervous, clutching the oath card in her hand. I swore her in without mentioning the flight, the crew, or the delay. This moment was hers. But as I handed her the certificate, I caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had heard, she knew, and she understood exactly what it meant for me to be there anyway. After the ceremony, she hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for showing me what standing your ground looks like." It reminded me that the fight for dignity isn't about titles or headlines. It's about the message you send to the people watching, especially the ones who will carry the weight of your example into their own battles. The airline could process its paperwork, draft its press statements, and conduct its reviews. But that day in the courthouse, the win was already sealed. I don't raise my voice. I raise consequences. When I finally returned home, I set my suitcase by the door. The robe went back on its wooden hanger, its fabric carrying the quiet weight of the courtroom, and the reminder that justice isn't just something you dispense from a bench. It's something you live in the moments no one else will fight for you. The house was still. The phone had stopped ringing. Outside, the night pressed gently against the windows, and for the first time since stepping onto that plane, my breathing slowed. I thought about the faces in that cabin, the ones who stayed silent, the ones who spoke up, and the ones who recorded because they knew the truth might be erased if left to memory alone. I thought about the young attorney who now carries her oath, not just in the words she recited, but in the example she witnessed. Some will say, I could have let it go. But letting it go would have meant accepting that humiliation is part of the price for existing where some think you don't belong. That's a price I will never pay. If you've ever been singled out for who you are, not what you did, tell me your story below. I read them and I know the power in being heard. If you'd stand up for a stranger, subscribe. Echoes of Hope is where silence ends and where stories like this find the voices they deserve. Titles shouldn't buy dignity, humanity should.